So what's going on? Do a video here. Obviously came up. If you're subscribed, then you saw this. If you're not, then you're seeing this randomly. So check the other videos out that are on this channel, and let me know what you think. So tonight I'm going to be talking about. Got a little bit of notes here. It's still unscripted, still kind of flowing from my mind, but I'm just going to organize my thoughts a little better with some notes here. So the thing I want to talk about now is when you're generally, when you have a child and you go to prison or jail. So that's going to be the topic overall. And specifically, I'm going to talk about my journey, I guess. It has been a journey, certainly. With being arrested and then having a child and being in prison and having a child out in society and in different situations. And then some possibilities that can happen, as a result of being arrested and being in prison. So, and having kids that are obviously not with you. So, generally when you're arrested, at that point, you're taken from the place that you're at, your house or whatever it may be, and you're taken to a jail. So that's the initial point of custody that you go to. Well, it's a police car, then you go to a jail, then you go to a prison. That's how that works. But at some point, in most people's lives, they have more than one person that I'd like to think anyway that could take care of a child if they're arrested. It happens where people are arrested and then Child Protective Services or the equivalent agency comes and gets involved and puts the kid or kids, if there's several, in some kind of foster care or state care, temporary housing. As far as that, may put them with relatives, which does happen. Other relatives can intervene and petition the court in that area for custody or temporary custody or an emergency type guardianship. Or if you're married and have a spouse or a partner, however it may be, you're arrested, then that other person, the mother or father or your significant other can take that child and keep them while you're going through the legal process. That the last arrangement is probably the most ideal for lots of reasons. You can imagine why, because otherwise you've got people that are going to court and saying that they want your child, or the state is making a decision to place your child somewhere else where they certainly aren't used to and may not want to go, but haven't been before, and then they're separated from you, so that's gonna cause some more anxiety and some more issues there, certainly. So while you're in prison, you typically don't lose your rights to your children. You still have the right to visitation. You obviously lose the right for a period of time for custody, because states are in the habit of placing children in prisons and jails with their parents. There's an exception to that, and people probably know about it. It's where a newborn or an infant is born to a mother, and the female is the one that's in prison, and the state may have a program where they allow her to keep that child in the prison for a period of time. They inevitably will get taken either by family or by the state if they're pregnant and born in prison. So that's the one kind of exception where that kind of stands out. But in general, you have someone on the outside that has custody and care and control and guardianship of your kids while you're in there. And there are at the same time, there's a lot and there's none resources when it comes to having children and being in custody or being in prison. I say custody, I mean that generally in the form of in jail, in some kind of an immigration. That's a whole other issue in and of itself, and I'm not really going to talk about. But when you're in custody, you're in jail or prison or on some kind of a house arrest or a supervision where you can't leave. If there's an EPO type situation or a domestic violence order, protection order, and your children live with the mother, for instance, then you obviously wouldn't be able to go and see them. So you don't lose your rights to your children while you're in jail or prison, but over the course of time, conditions are met. From what I've seen in my experiences, that can eventually happen, and that's what else I want to talk about tonight. So Before I went to jail or prison, I didn't know. I had some basic fundamental understanding about the law and the way that worked, but I wasn't, and still not, a lawyer. I had some basic information about concepts and how the law worked. Didn't know specifically. Didn't know how Kentucky or Indiana or the relevant states that were involved did anything. Didn't know where really to look to find those answers and those resources, and didn't really know how to start preserving things and protecting, certainly my rights and my daughter's rights. Over the course of a really brief amount of time, I was able to find that out, thankfully. And I can distinctly remember going to one of the first contacts, I guess, that I had was going to jail, and this was within the first few days. I saw my daughter in jail, and that was for a brief time, and it was a pretty, I guess, in to her and to me, and more so to her though, it was a pretty traumatic type of situation because the jail didn't do in-person visits. They did video monitoring from one building to another. I was in the jail and they were in the courthouse, which was a physically separate, building. So there was cameras and a big television monitor. She was able to see me and I was able to see her, and there was a video link, but that was it. There wasn't any physical contact. I couldn't hug her to visit or anything like that. So that was, she was, at the time that happened, she was 5. She had just turned 5. So she, equated, in her mind, I think, she equated seeing me on TV to TV, not to being real, because we'd always told her that things that are on TV aren't real. So when sometime later, a few days later, there was the initial custody or guardianship request or change that was entered in the court, and that began a whole long circus chain of events of court proceedings and that kind of stuff. There was a petition to have guardianship named. There was an emergency guardianship at first. That was the very first, the initial contact with the courts, and that was granted to the other parties in the situation. They were my wife's parents, mother and stepfather. At a certain point later on, in January of 2010, so that was in October of 2009. In January of 2010, there was an actual more permanent type guardianship hearing, and that happened. I wasn't able to go because I was on house arrest. I asked to go, and wasn't permitted to go because of the terms of the house arrest that I was on before my final sentencing. I did want to go. I did try to respond back and give my feelings or what I felt should be done or shouldn't be done. That didn't really seem to matter, though. The guardianship was named and entered, and from that point, the Ashley's parents had guardianship of our daughter. Kind of along the same timeline, there was a civil lawsuit, and they were obviously the plaintiffs. They sued me and my employer and several other people as a result of what happened, what occurred, that I got arrested for, the underlying criminal issue. So after some time, there was a settlement to the civil lawsuit, and then in August, there was a deposition for that lawsuit. It was settled sometime later on after that, August 2010. But when I first got to the first prison that I went to, I began trying to talk to the legal aides that were there. It was kind of an appointment only. You have to catch them in the hallway type situation. There wasn't really a lot of resources and information about how to deal with a custody or a visitation or family issue, when you first got to prison. So there's not going to be a bunch of lawyers coming to help you and file motions for you. It's not going to happen. It didn't happen in my case anyway. So I began, when I got to the first permanent prison, I guess, that I was at, the place that I was going to be housed for a prolonged period of time, and I was there about two years or more, a little over 2 years. So when I was first got there, I began looking in the law library myself, because you could just go in there and look things up. I got a little more familiar with the legal research software and systems they had, and also wrote a lot of letters. That was one thing that I can say that is very important. If you have children that are outside and you want to maintain contact, you're gonna have to kind of change things, because a lot of people are used to touching their kids. They're used to seeing them every day and asking them how they're doing, or they know how they're doing because they're there every day. You're in prison, you're not there every day. So you need to kind of change up your communication strategies, with respect to that. So letters are important, and they're also something that are a physical, tangible thing that you can keep. You can get a phone call, you can obtain a phone call, a copy of that, or whatever, depending on where you live at or what prison or state you're in. But the letters and cards are more important. So if you send a card or a letter out to your children, keep a copy of it. Just write the letter twice or make a copy of it if you have the money. It's better to do that, obviously, and date it and all those things, and just put it in a file, kind of put it separately to where, and that'll come into play later on. You understand why. But so I started learning about some things that I could do, and my honest thinking in my head was I wanted to be able to have the court order a visitation between my daughter and me. That wasn't really practical, and that wasn't going to happen, so I had to develop a strategy on how to. The ultimate goal was to have that happen, but I needed to be, practical about how I was going to do it and be realistic. Ashley's parents lived, and Kaylee lived in Indiana, in southern Indiana, and I was at a prison that was in Central City, Kentucky. So fair distance away. A prison isn't the most ideal visiting type scenario, and there's also the thing of how they felt and their emotions at the time, and I'm sure they haven't really mitigated much to now, but there's no way that I was going to get a court to order them to bring my daughter to visit me where I was. It just wasn't going to happen. I accepted that. What I did do is I did some research and found that Indiana has a grandparent visitation statute, which allows the grandparents who have been involved and been around a child to seek that from the court. So, all this was very new for me, and learning how to use a typewriter. I've used them before. I'm 37, so I've used a typewriter before. It's not something that would be totally a foreign concept, but it's been several years before that I've actually used one. And it was a limited kind of a function. But how did you learn how to use a typewriter? Because they don't give you, at the prison that I was at, they didn't give you access to a word processor, the typical laptop or something to that effect. If you wanted to type something, you had to either write it by hand or type it in a typewriter if you wanted to send it into a court, which would be more ideal instead of writing it. So began researching those things and learned about the grandparent visitation statutes. Wrote a petition, basically, and then sent it to my mom and sent her a very detailed letter about what to do with that visitation petition and how to effect, proper service of it to where the opposing party would get it, to where the court would get a copy of it. She would keep a copy of it. I kept a copy of it. And it took about 2 years. So, and I wrote letters and asked, what was going on and why. Nothing was going on, but as far as a hearing date, but I wasn't the person that was of interest in that situation, so they didn't really acknowledge me or write back, but I did write letters asking the court what was going on with that. At some point in January of 2013, there was a visitation order that was entered. January, February 2013, I believe. And not very long after that visitation order was entered, the maternal grandparents, they filed for an adoption, which is I'll talk about here shortly. So when you're in prison, trying to get visitation or custody or any kind of contact with your children is going to be difficult because of the situation that you're in. What you have to do is you have to accept that you're there and accept the limitations that you have with regard to that. And then work around them and try to figure out a way around them. And there's a way to do it. May not be the easiest, may not be the most ideal, but there is a way kind of to deal with and mitigate those things that limitations you may have. So the adoption was filed, and the adoption was filed, and I received a copy because at that point I was the one that was the parent still am. That'll never change. So I was given the service of that adoption petition. And in the adoption petition, it laid out a series of grounds, that allegations and statutory reasoning as to why, because they asked for the adoption, and then they put in their language and statutes. They mentioned those that specifically said that we're asking for this adoption, but the father's consent isn't required because of A, B, and C. And so I had to refute those. The day that I got the adoption petition, I actually just graduated from legal aid training that I signed up for and went to another prison to attend and to finish. So the next day, I came back to the prison that I was at the time in Lexington and began working on responses and answers and all this kind of stuff, appearance, different other motions that related to it. And prisoners, when you file motions, and I'm not saying that you should be your own lawyer in every situation or any situation, because it really isn't ideal. That's why the lawyers go to law school. That's why they have their bar exams. That's why they're held to the standards they're held to. And so it's always best and ideal to have an attorney for anything related to a court, to a criminal case, a civil case, a family case, bankruptcy, anything to do with the law and with courts. You should have a lawyer if possible. In my situation, I wasn't able to do that. I made $20 a month. I was basically homeless, and the state gave me a room to live in, is how it was pretty much. Now, granted, I was homeless and all that because I was in there under a sentence and a lawful conviction, and I pled guilty to and all that. But for all intents and purposes, I was, a pauper or homeless, basically. So I didn't have access to thousands of dollars to have an attorney, to hire an attorney, which, in a family case, they're going to typically demand that as a retainer up front. It's not going to be conditioned on your ability to pay. It's if you can't pay, then they don't work. And if they don't work, then nothing gets done in your case, in your family case. So that's another issue that people don't really think about. And over the years that I was a legal aid, one of the things that I really tried to kind of focus on was people that had family type issues come up, whether it was termination of parental rights or an adoption petition or one that had already been granted, a situation where they were in a parenting plan and they had strayed from that or something had happened. Maybe the mother that's out there is on drugs and she overdoses or gets arrested. Any number of other things that happen, the child's put in jeopardy. At that point, the father could potentially intervene and say, hey, these are my wishes. These are what I want to have happen. So the procedural history, I guess, if you will, from the grandparent visitation to the adoption petition. The adoption petition, there was a hearing that happened in 2013 in July, and that was Kentucky and Indiana. Everything related to the family case, the family situation with my daughter was in Indiana. Indiana was the home court. They were the court that had initial jurisdiction, so they kept that jurisdiction throughout the entire time. I was a prisoner in Kentucky, so I wasn't going to be able to get transported to Indiana for this hearing. So because it wasn't a criminal matter, it wasn't something the state was going to pay for, and it wasn't something I had the money to pay for either. If that would have been a consideration, it really wasn't, I don't think. But so the adoption hearing on the phone, it happened for me on the phone. There was like a teleconference that happened. I was there in theory, but I wasn't physically in the courtroom with the other people that were there in Indiana. So the judge decided that she was going to make a decision after she got off the phone. I'm pretty sure the decision was already made before the phone call ever happened and before the court date even occurred, is my feeling. I'm not being, anti-judicial system or anything like that. But you have someone that's in prison, and that the allegations and the things that I did and the uncontroverted facts to the situation that they were in, it really isn't that hard of a decision, I don't think. The problem is that I'd asked for an attorney multiple times based on the fact that I'm poor. I don't have any money. If I was arrested while driving and I had a joint a marijuana cigarette, a joint, whatever on me, or if I had some residue or something, or if I had someone else's credit card or someone else's ID, I could ask for a lawyer. I'd get one. I couldn't be made to go to court without a lawyer. And it's not that the law favors the criminals. It's the law favors, ideally anyway, the law should favor no one, because these rights are rights. They apply to everyone and anyone that's in this country that is a citizen. So I asked for an attorney. That was repeatedly denied. I asked for that attorney in the form of a motion that I sent to the court. They got that they can't, really deny that they didn't get. And the judge went ahead and ordered the adoption anyway. So before that adoption was ever granted, I already had the appeal typed out and ready to go, because I anticipated what the court was going to do. So it was a matter of, I think, 3 or 4 days between the time that I actually received it and the time that the court in Indiana received my notice of appeal, saying that, hey, I don't accept this. I'm not going to stand for this. From there, it went through a very, very contentious history. There was back and forth and back and forth. The court, in the Indiana Court of Appeals, tried on multiple occasions for different administrative issues to deny my appeal and deny my request and the chance to get to an appeal, for that matter. There's cases that talk about prisoners being held to a less standard. As far as drafting pleadings, the higher courts, federal courts, circuit courts, and federal district courts, Supreme Court, recognize that prisoners are not attorneys. They're lay people, and even if they have some kind of legal training, they're not a lawyer. So they need to be given some discretion and some latitude as far as what they're saying, and to be construed in a way that it would be advantageous to protect their rights and also their interest in whatever the case may be. So it wasn't a thing of the syntax or what I was actually saying. It was, I would write a motion, or I'd do a motion, and there wouldn't be page numbers. I'd forgot, because I was in such a rush to try to send this stuff out. And I wasn't used to it. I wasn't prepared to deal with it. I would forget a page number on a form. And so they would deny, and I'd have to recopy all those things 10 times, because there was 8 copies to the court. I had to keep one. I had to send one to the attorney for the opposing party. So every time there was an issue like that happened. Now, I can say that because they kept sending these notices saying that, hey, your pleadings are deficient in this way and that way, I learned really quickly how to not be deficient. So by the end, my brief was probably to the standard that an attorney would do, and was certainly interpreted that way. So I remember getting something in legal mail from the court, Indiana Court of Appeals, and they said, your appeal is denied. I was mad. I went into the law library the next day, and I typed more or less a very nice fuck you to the Indiana Court of Appeals, is what I did. And I still have a copy of it. I haven't read it recently, but it was more or less just a response to what they just said. For some reason, somehow, after that, within the week, I got a letter from the Indiana Court of Appeals saying, you have until July of 2014 to send your brief in and have it served properly and all that. I don't really know how that happened or what happened with that or what made that possible. But within a period of 12 days, I was able to submit a brief. I've been working on doing some research on it before. The issues that I had brought up were all substantive, and they were all related to the allegations that they had brought up. As far as they said that my consent to the adoption wasn't required because I had failed to communicate with my daughter for a period of time, because I'd failed to support her when I was able to, and because they also alleged that I was an unfit parent. Now, for the financial support, like I said, I made $20 a month. I was granted leave to not pay any kind of filing fees or anything in the court. So that was eventually, declined because of that. That's what the Court of Appeals in Indiana said. As for me being unfit, ultimately that was thrown out because it didn't apply. It wasn't applicable. It wasn't correct. Didn't meet the standards of what that means in Indiana. under their case law there. So as to communication, there was several admissions in open court that were recorded and transcribed and are on the record, that I did send letters, notes, cards, presents for Christmas and birthdays and those kinds of things to my daughter, and they never would give them to her. They said it didn't matter what it was. They would never give anything that I ever sent to her. So they created the condition that they then alleged as the reason for having the adoption granted, and that I'm glad that the courts saw through that and that was kicked out. So ultimately, the result of the appeal, the brief was that the appeal was granted and their adoption petition was denied. It was reversed and remanded. And it was reversed and remanded to the lower court on constitutional grounds, namely because I didn't have an attorney when I repeatedly requested one, and because I was indigent or poor or a pauper, at the time that this was going on. I didn't have an attorney. In the instructions, the Court of Appeals said that they were going to kick the case back to the lower court, have a hearing to decide whether I was able to pay for one, and if I wasn't, then they were going to appoint one and have a new adoption hearing. So that is exactly what happened. I'll put a link down in the description below to the appeal and the publication opinion, and it can be found at 21 Northeast 3rd 96. It's a reporter series in Indiana. It's a case from Indiana Court of Appeals in 2014. It's called In Regarding the Adoption of KW. KW is my daughter's initials, and I'm MW in that case. So after I was released from prison in 2015, there was, look at my time here, okay. After I was released from prison in 2015, there was some other hearings that happened, and ultimately what occurred is that new adoption hearing did happen, and then from there I was able to get my own attorney and to have him pursue visitation in the lower court, and that is still an active case technically, but I've for lots of reasons I've decided that after lots of counsel and lots of thinking and lots of consideration, I think right now, our daughter's 16. She turned 16 in August of this year of 2020. I haven't seen her since she was 5. It's been 11 years. So that's something that definitely bothers me every single day, that I've missed the last 11 years of her life, and the reason that I've missed the last 11 years of her life. Ashley's dad filed for an EPO before I was released. I was actually served that the day that I was released from prison, and I have my ideas about why that actually occurred. But, what it served to do was to keep me away from Louisville for a period of time. I went to Newport when I was released, and then came here to Louisville eventually, which is closer to where this hearings and the remanded portion of the case was going to be. So whether it was probation and parole's issue, whether it was that was done intentionally, not really sure. It doesn't really matter at this point. But more or less the best thing that I can think of to do right now is to just leave it alone. She'll be 18 in 2 years. At that point, she can make a decision about contacting me. If she does contact me, I'm not the same person that I was because of the things that I've seen and gone through and been through and dealt with. But I'm also older and more mature. And I miss her. I miss Kaylee. I miss her every day. And I'm very sad that I've missed the last 11 years of her life. It's never what I wanted. And the thing that hurts me the most is that her mother has missed the last 11 years of her life. And it's because in that situation is present because it's what I've done. And that concept is never far away from me. It's never more than a millimeter away from me at all times. Very cognizant, very aware of that. And it's, we have a 13-month-old son right now. He was born September 2019. And I love him. He's I love him as much as I love, the daughter that me and Ashley had. Um, I I don't want to have him know anything close to what my daughter's known, and that's what I'm trying to do every single day. Um, so you know, the battle for my daughter has been lost in the courts. It's been fought through motions, accusations, and pleadings, and depositions, and lawyers, and invoices, and all of that stuff. And I haven't, in all of that, I've not seen her. She hasn't seen me. I know that they are. I believe that they've poisoned her mind. They're good people, I think, overall, but that's contradicted by the fact of what they've done since then. They have not let me see her or her see me. They have controlled every aspect of her life, including limiting what she can and can't do as far as contacting people. They've done some other things that I don't really agree with, but they're taking care of her physical needs, her mental needs. But I do worry that what they've done over the last 11 years is going to have an effect, and I also worry about the harm that what they've told her and what she's come to believe when she finds out one day that a lot of that probably is not true. Then what's going to happen? And it's not for me to say anything about it, but that's what I feel is going to happen one day. So, if you get a jail sentence, it's not just you that does that time. People think, oh, I can do 10 years sitting on my head because they've done 20 or 30. That's not the attitude to have, because when you're doing time, your kids are too, and you're missing out on their lives. And that, depending on if you don't value your kids, then go ahead and, sell the dope or do whatever you're going to do. Me personally, I don't want to ever be in handcuffs again. And I don't want to, have any time for my son missing that doesn't need to be there. Which is none. So that's what I have right now. That's I guess a short procedural history of my daughter's adoption case, and then what it's like to deal with things in prison from a legal perspective with your children. I can tell you that in general, there are not any legal aids in most prisons that deal with family stuff. So because it's not really all that profitable to them, and that's kind of a crass way to say it, but that's what it is. The prison doesn't really care about your family issue, because you can see they wouldn't transport me over there to the hearings. There was an issue with Indiana. Their Court of Appeals in Indiana requires different colored paper than Kentucky does because of different states. They're different courts, and so they require different colored paper. In order to do one of the briefs that I needed to do to keep the appeal going, I had to have a certain color paper. I got so much resistance and so much refusal to help me get that paper. It was just, I needed 20 sheets of paper of a certain color. And Indiana kept kicking everything that I sent because of these weird technical deficiencies as page numbers or dates, this or that. And I asked to have them allow me to send the brief on a white piece of paper, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't accommodate it. Finally, what I had to do was threaten the warden. I threatened to sue the warden. I fully had every intention of doing that and following through with that. Because if he was denying me the paper I needed to do this appeal, then I was going to sue him. Whether that would have turned out anything or not, it wasn't really a threat to be a threat, but it was a threat to hopefully coerce him to do something different than what he was doing, and it worked. So I was able to get the paper. They approved it. I sent the brief in, and it was accepted. But that's some of the things you have to deal with when you think about, when you go to prison and you have kids, and then you have to go through that. Me personally, when I was a legal aid, I tried to help people because it was personal to me, because when that adoption, the adoption decree was sent, I got sent a copy of it, and they said that my daughter is no longer my daughter. They said that her last name is no longer my last name. And they said that her biological parents were no longer who they were. They rewrote history, and it still bothers me. The effect of the reverse and the remand was that was undone. So she went back to her name that we named her, me and her mom named her, that her parents named her. and she'll have that until she changes it herself if she wants to when she turns 18. But it's very difficult to do that, and also to deal with your own stuff and your own sanity, and then the day-to-day stuff that goes on in prison, and then to kind of focus on the family aspect and trying to secure your children, basically, and see them and talk to them and know how they're doing. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below, and I will definitely answer them. I haven't had one comment yet, so somebody say something. Thanks. Well, I've had a couple, but nothing really substantive. Thanks.